our world in transition. Across the globe, our environment is in a constant state of change.
You can see some of these icebergs are melting. You can feel, there we are, there we are, that gives you an idea of what it's like.
Global warming, it's a term we've all heard, but what does it mean, and is the Earth really getting hotter?
It doesn't take a rocket scientist to recognize that there are major problems.
What kind of impact do we have on our environment, and are we really headed toward a crisis here in New Mexico and around the globe?
We need to prioritize and spend money and resources on those things that are going to most improve human lives, and global warming is way down the list.
Join us as we explore the climate case.
Thank you for joining us for our special report, The Climate Case. I'm Joe Vigil.
And I'm Antoinette Antonio. In the next half hour, we're going to cover a variety of issues.
We will hear what our state is doing to try to be more environmentally friendly and why some say it may not be the best way to spend your tax dollars.
And with a big election just weeks away, we'll also hear from state political leaders on where they stand on climate issues.
But first, a debate that's still brewing among scientists. What's been causing temperatures to rise? Now, most scientists agree the Earth has been getting hotter, but there's disagreement on what's causing that to happen.
A widely accepted theory is that something called the greenhouse effect is behind the rise in the mercury. Meteorologist Ty Shesky explains how it works.
Sit at Tingley Beach on a summer day and it becomes obvious the heat we feel is being pumped out by the sun. That heat is known as solar radiation. It's what can give you a sunburn if you're braving the outdoors without sunscreen, and it's the primary source of our heat. The ground soaks up some of that radiation, but also reflects some of it back to space. But just like the homes we live in, the Earth also has insulation to keep some of that heat locked in when the sun goes down, our atmosphere. There are a variety of things brewing in our atmosphere: oxygen, nitrogen, water vapor, and carbon dioxide, also called CO2, to just name a few. It's the water vapor and carbon dioxide that are known as greenhouse gases. The more water vapor and carbon dioxide floating around, the more heat gets trapped, and the hotter things get for us when we go outside. Many scientists agree temperatures are rising because there are more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So where did all that extra carbon dioxide come from?
People, for the past few centuries, have been adding to the atmosphere's reservoir of CO2 by burning fossil fuels and changing land use practices, burning tropical forests and so forth.
It is true that our need to heat our homes, keep our lights on, and get ourselves around town all pump carbon dioxide into the air. What scientists and politicians debate is whether our activity is causing climates around the globe to dangerously overheat, and that's a question that's yet to be fully answered. In the Pinpoint 4 Storm Center, Ty Shesky, Eyewitness News 4.
The debate about global warming started decades ago, but became a popular topic 2 years ago with the release of a feature-length documentary.
In generations and centuries past, would have consequences that we could overcome. We don't have that luxury anymore. We didn't ask for it, but here it is.
Al Gore became the face of the argument for human-caused global warming after his movie An Inconvenient Truth gained widespread popularity. Gore presents a case that finds temperatures around the globe heating to dangerous levels. His argument, using scientific data, connects the temperature rise to our use of fossil fuels to power virtually everything on the planet. It's a theory that's been embraced by a wide range of groups.
In 2007, an international panel founded by the United Nations released a report saying the Earth has seen record temperatures the past decade. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, also concluded it's very likely the increase in heat is due to human activity.
We can't think of any particular time in Earth history where, over a very, very short period of time, there have been tremendous additions of greenhouse gases like CO2, nitrous oxide, methane, and others. I'm talking about a century or a little bit more than a century of tremendous additions in greenhouse gases into the Earth's atmosphere. That's an experiment that Mother Nature, we don't think, has played around with in the past over the 4.6 billion years of Earth history.
While human carbon emissions adding to the greenhouse effect is a popular theory for causing a temperature increase, it isn't the only one. Other scientists argue there's another logical explanation for why it can get warmer around the globe: the sun. Meteorologist Ty Shesky has that side of the story.
Besides man-made greenhouse gases, there are other factors that can impact the Earth's climate. First of all, we've got variations in the solar output. What this means is that the amount of solar radiation given off by the sun at different periods of time varies, and that causes the temperature of the Earth to vary as well. We also have variations in the Earth's orbit, and the orbit is simply the path that the Earth takes around the sun. Now, it's not a perfect circle, and it does change slightly at different time periods, bringing it closer or further away from the sun at different time periods, and that can impact the Earth's temperature. We've also got sunspot cycles, and what a sunspot is it's a very intense magnetic storm on the sun that impacts the Earth's magnetic field, and when the Earth's magnetic field is affected, that affects the amount of cloud cover that's on the Earth during different time periods, and that can impact the Earth's temperature, of course, as well. And last but certainly not least, we have volcanic activity. When volcanoes are more active, that means more sulfide compounds can make it into the atmosphere. And when you have more sulfide compounds in the atmosphere, the Earth's temperature is usually cooler. And long before we had this man-made global warming, we also had the medieval warm period between the 9th and 14th centuries. And we do have some pretty good data across the world, especially in Europe, numerical data that shows we could have been 2 degrees warmer than modern times back 1,000 years ago. Obviously, this warmer period was not due to man-made greenhouse gases. So there are certainly a lot of questions still out there.
And there is a growing movement in the scientific community which looks to those solar cycles as the main reason temperatures have increased lately. Now, one of the most vocal supporters of that theory is John Coleman. He founded the Weather Channel and has worked as a meteorologist since the 1950s. He calls global warming a hoax and makes his case for what causes climate change.
Since 2002, the sun has gone quiet and planet Earth is in a very strong cooling trend. Temperatures have dropped about a degree on average worldwide since 2002. Now, back in the 1980s and 1990s, when Al Gore was stirring up this whole global warming thing, and the UN IPCC was issuing its edicts about climate change, the Earth was warming up. It warmed up about a half a degree during those 2 decades. Why was that? Well, the sun was at a peak of a solar cycle. And I think it's pretty likely that that is what caused that warm-up. In any case, remember this about planet Earth. We have 2 basic climate patterns. We have the ice ages, when the Earth is a ball of ice, too cold to live on, and then we have the interglacial periods. And the interglacial periods are when the ice melts, the Earth warms up, life flourishes, and we've been in an interglacial period for the past 10,000 years. So the ice has been melting and the temperatures have been warming. I guess you could call it nature's global warming. It has nothing to do with the activities of man. It's a natural phenomenon. It's true that many scientists believe that global warming is real, that carbon dioxide is the culprit, but a growing number of scientists are speaking up to debunk that tired and, I'm afraid, unproven and in fact disproven theory. We now have 34,000 scientists, 10,000 of them with PhDs, who have signed a petition debunking global warming. And here's why. CO2, carbon dioxide, is not a pollutant. It's not some evil substance that man has created, but instead it's a natural part of our atmosphere. There's always been carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and it has always varied through the eons, right along with the temperature and the amount of ice and the whole global weather scheme. The carbon dioxide, on the other hand, hasn't caused the warming or cooling. Instead, it appears that the warmer the air is, the more carbon dioxide it can hold. Now, carbon dioxide is what I create when I breathe. That's carbon dioxide. You create it too. And what happens to it? It goes out into the atmosphere and plants use it to turn green. Photosynthesis, the process that creates all of our trees and plants, everything that we grow and eat, is totally dependent upon carbon dioxide. Without it, there'd be no life on Earth. So it is not a pollutant, it's a natural part of our atmosphere. And by the way, it's a tiny trace of our environment. So of 100,000 molecules of atmosphere, let's say in this little box in front of my face, 38 of them are carbon dioxide. Hardly enough to create a giant disruption of our natural climatic pattern.
So there are scientists who strongly believe we humans have very little, if anything, to do with temperature increases around the globe. In fact, John Coleman says there are studies showing that the climate here on Earth may be changing, but perhaps not in the way most people think.
Global temperature changes have been a concern throughout the past century, but it wasn't always about the world getting hotter. The Dust Bowl of the 1930s was one of the most severe climate events to hit the United States. 50 million acres of prairie lands throughout North America saw vegetation die. In the following decades, there became a concern about something called global cooling. Meteorologist Shar Spalding explains.
In the 1970s, a theory quickly took hold that the world was on the verge of slipping into a chilly crisis. The idea of global cooling took hold after several decades of dropping temperatures starting in the 1940s. The 1970s were an unusually cold decade, prompting several studies which predicted the Earth would only get colder, wreaking havoc on food supplies. Some of those studies suggested the Earth would cool off for the same reason many believed it's warming up: humans pumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. But in the global cooling version, that carbon would have a greater effect, reflecting radiation back into space before it could hit the surface. Ultimately, the theory of global cooling still remains, but it has gained less support throughout the years. Shar Spalding, Eyewitness News 4.
Greenhouse effect, solar cycles, the amount of molecules floating around in the air. It's a lot of science to digest, so let's take a minute to recap these concepts. Well, we found out that it's widely accepted that temperatures on Earth have jumped in the last few decades. We learned about the greenhouse effect, elements in our atmosphere which keep heat from escaping the planet. Climate theorists, including Al Gore and a commission formed by the UN, say our activity from driving cars to using fossil fuels to power our cities add to that effect. But we've also heard another explanation for what could cause us to feel the heat: solar cycles. The sun goes through phases where it erupts with activity. When there's more solar activity on the surface of the sun, as there's been recently, the Earth gets more solar radiation. And scientists have been trying to understand climate changes for decades. And there are even theories that the Earth was, and perhaps still is, actually starting to cool off.
Whatever the cause of the recent heat, you can expect to see changes here in New Mexico if temperatures keep rising. David Gutzler, a climatologist and earth sciences professor at the University of New Mexico, explains what the weather in our state will feel like in a few decades if things continue to heat up.
A reasonable scenario based on kind of a mid-range projection from climate models is that by the middle of the century, we might increase summer temperatures by closer to 4 or 5 degrees Fahrenheit and winter temperatures by another 2 or 3 degrees Fahrenheit. Certainly in the summer, by the middle of this century, that would put us way outside the range of historical variability that people have ever experienced in the Southwest. So summers will be hotter than the hottest summer we've seen so far.
In the desert Southwest, one of the most fragile and important parts of our environment is our rivers. Professor Gutzler says the state's water could be drastically affected by a hotter climate.
That amount of warming is enough to have really profound effects on vegetation and on water resources. As the climate warms up, we expect stream flows to decrease significantly. That's because the streams in New Mexico, especially flowing out of the northern part of the state, are snow-fed. In a warmer climate, we'll have a lot less snow. And the snow will be restricted to higher elevations, it'll melt earlier in the spring, and when that happens, the evaporation rates go up, and all summer long.
Here in New Mexico, state leaders firmly back the idea that climate change is directly caused by human activity. In 2005, Governor Bill Richardson issued an executive order forming the state's Climate Change Advisory Group. At the end of 2006, the group, made up of a cross-section of business, state, and environmental experts, issued 69 recommendations on how to reduce global impact.
Well, one of the big ones was to have more of our electricity come from renewable energy sources. So 20% by 2020 of our electricity has to come from renewables. That was one of the big ones. Another big one was to join with other states and provinces to create a regional cap and trade program. And we did that through the Western Climate Initiative just 2 weeks ago.
As Jim Norton just mentioned, New Mexico recently joined a group of other Western states and Canadian provinces looking to cut carbon emissions. The group will use a cap and trade idea that's become very popular among states and countries looking to cut the amount of carbon dioxide that gets loaded into the air within their borders. The cap refers to setting a limit on carbon emitted by industries. In the pact New Mexico signed, those limits would vary from state to state, as California uses way more energy than New Mexico. The caps would also vary between industries, since companies that own power plants generally produce more carbon than a cattle rancher. Now, say you own a power plant and halfway through the year, you realize you're going to hit your limit for how much carbon you're putting out. That's where the trade part comes in. The plan would allow a business that already reached its carbon limit to buy emissions credits from other businesses that aren't going to hit their limits. Businesses could also get more credits through offsets like developing green space.
That cap and trade program will be the centerpiece of the Western Climate Initiative. 11 states and provinces are currently part of the initiative. New Mexico joins California, Oregon, Washington, Arizona, Utah, Montana, as well as British Columbia, Manitoba, Ontario, and Quebec in the partnership.
All the member states and provinces in the Western Climate Initiative agree, both in the U.S. and in Canada, that a federal program would be better. But there isn't one, and we can't wait. This is a serious enough problem that we need to take action now. And we can learn some things here in New Mexico and with our regional partners that may help to shape and influence that ultimate federal program. And that's what we're hoping will happen.
Not everyone agrees with the Western Climate Initiative, especially on an economic level. The Rio Grande Foundation, a policy group here in Albuquerque, says these types of programs are not the best way to regulate emissions.
Cap and trade is essentially an attempt by politicians to create a marketplace that really doesn't exist. It would be more honest if they just said, we're going to tax carbon, we're going to tax coal, gasoline, oil, natural gas, everything that is carbon-based and used to create energy, if they just levied a tax on it. Well, the idea being to create less usage. That would be the intellectually honest thing to do.
Paul Gessing says ultimately it should be up to individuals to make up their own minds on global warming and make changes in their own lives if they feel it's a problem. Now,
just because I don't believe the U.S. government should be acting in an aggressive way on global warming and really, enacting these tax increases and cap and trade schemes, doesn't mean that individuals can't. Individuals can act. They can buy wind power from PNM, for example. They can engage in personal behavior, like taking mass transit, for example, that will reduce their own carbon footprint if that's something they're concerned about.
New Mexico is taking a very active role in trying to preserve the environment and, as most state leaders say, save an endangered climate. Researchers at UNM predict that by the middle of this century, the state will see temperatures rise about 4 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer and 2 or 3 degrees Fahrenheit in the winter. To help reduce greenhouse emissions, Governor Richardson joined New Mexico with 6 other states and 4 Canadian provinces in the Western Climate Initiative. As we've learned, the group hopes to use an economic program called Cap and Trade to help cut down on carbon emissions. But critics say cap and trade could prove to be ineffective at reducing emissions and only serve to put New Mexico business and industry at an economic disadvantage.
As scientists and economists debate answers to climate questions, it's up to politicians to decide how much of our money and effort should go toward climate issues. In New Mexico, state politicians have taken a strong role in support of stemming climate change. That's apparent in the Four Corners, where coal-fired power plants supply most of the area's energy. Plans to build the new Desert Rock Power Plant are being challenged by the state. Governor Richardson and the state attorney general say another plant would only take a negative toll on the environment. At both the state and federal level, global warming has become a hot button issue. It's become a question in presidential debates and in political ads. We spoke to a few New Mexico politicians and found fairly widespread agreement that this is an issue that could have a big impact on New Mexico.
Since entering office, Governor Richardson has made the environment a priority. A firm believer in global warming, the governor says the state must act now.
Yes, we have mandated the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by our utilities, by our power plants. We want to stay as close as we can to the International Kyoto Treaty. But I think for the future, in a new administration, hopefully, we're talking about reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by the year 2020, 80% by the year 2040, what are called cap and trade systems. We got to reduce these greenhouse gases because the planet is suffering. You can see it around the world. You can see it in New Mexico. You can see the planet basically saying, come on, Earth, come on, men and women and polluters, give us a break. We need to do that.
From Santa Fe to Washington, D.C., acknowledging human-caused global warming is a popular position. New Mexico Senator Jeff Bingaman says it's one of a few problems the federal government needs to take quick action on to solve.
Well, I think the evidence is overwhelming that not only do we have a warming of the Earth's climate, but that human activity is a significant part of the cause of that. And so I do think we need to be taking action as soon as possible to begin reversing that, and particularly to begin controlling greenhouse gases. I think it's clear we're going to have to do several things at once in Washington.
One of two men will join Senator Jeff Bingaman in the Senate after the November election. We spoke with Democrat Senate candidate Tom Udall and his opponent, Republican Steve Pierce, on where the issue of climate change fits into Washington's priorities.
We live in one of the most challenging eras ever. The war on terror is the battle of our generation. The global financial meltdown is serious and needs resources developed to that. The international crises, Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, North Korea, are all problems that need to be solved. And in that mix, then we put global warming. Absolutely need to address it. The scientific models were thrown into disarray by last winter, the coldest winter on record, global ice caps tripling, and what we need to do is move beyond the science discussion into the practical applications, clean air, clean water, clean soil. All of us agree that we want that. I've made the commitment in my personal life, in my business life, and in the congressional life that we're going to do what we have to keep our environment clean. That's my commitment for the U.S. Senate seat.
I don't have any doubt that this is a quality of life issue in New Mexico. It impacts water. It's going to impact our agriculture. All sorts of things can change as a result of this. You know, we have a big tourist industry. People come here for our mountains. They come here to ski. If these trends keep up, we could see our snowpack disappear, which would affect everything around New Mexico. So I think it's quality of life, it's impacting business, it's impacting anyone that depends on water, and so that's everybody in an arid land. I think that the voters in this election are probably very focused on the economy and their lives and the impact on them, on the war in Iraq, on our energy future. But I think they also should be focused on global warming and the seriousness of it, because it can have a big impact on their lives.
The climate case is yet to be fully solved.
While there's a strong push to change the way our cities, states, and countries operate, there's still uncertainty about what is happening to our planet.
No matter what, and however you consider this, there is absolutely no question that the changes in the Earth's atmosphere are happening at a very alarming rate. There's absolutely no question about it.
I think this global warming hoax is the greatest scam in history. I can't see anything that comes close to its impact. After all, it has been used by the United Nations to really put a crimp on the industrial activities of the advanced nations, to cause us to be very careful about our oil exploration. We haven't drilled any oil wells in the U.S. in 30 years. We haven't built any refineries. And it has really changed the way that we look at our life, and now we're paying all these carbon credits because of our use of fossil fuels. That's a huge, huge cost on the way our society works. And because we haven't drilled any oil wells or built any refineries, in the United States we've been totally dependent on imported oil. So now we've built up to where we're sending $700 billion a year to the oil-producing countries to get their fossil fuel. And that is pretty well bankrupting our country. The cost? Oh, the cost is huge. I have seen nothing like this scam.
There are some really serious problems for us here in New Mexico. And I think a lot of people think that it's mostly a coastal city problem with rising sea levels, that coastal cities will be flooding. But I think we really get hit here in the Southwest harder and faster because we're going to have hotter temperatures, reduced snowpack, more forest fires, more intense droughts when they do happen because it'll be hotter. And because we're so dependent on water here in the Southwest, we could have some very serious problems.
One of our main issues in the state is quality of life, and I'm going to pursue global warming issues, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, emissions from vehicles. Absolutely. Look, this is real. Science says that man-made pollution and global warming are one and the same. So we've got to act here. And even
you may have a great concern about global warming. Whether it's founded or not is up for debate, but other people who need to make their livelihoods off of a trucker or someone who's really impacted by high energy prices, they may not share your opinion, and I don't think it's right for you to impose your viewpoint on them until we have some solid evidence that this is a true crisis for our civilization.
Thank you for watching. I'm Joe V. Hill.
And I'm Antoinette Antonio. Have a good evening.
Our world in transition. Across the globe, our environment is in a constant state of change.
You can see some of these icebergs are melting. You can feel, there we are, I mean there we are, that gives you an idea of what it's like.
Global warming, it's a term we've all heard, but what does it mean, and is the Earth really getting hotter?
It doesn't take a rocket scientist to recognize that there are major problems.
What kind of impact do we have on our environment, and are we really headed toward a crisis here in New Mexico and around the globe?
We need to prioritize and spend money and resources on those things that are going to most improve human lives, and global warming is way down the list.
Join us as we explore the climate case.
Thank you for joining us for our special report, The Climate Case. I'm Joe V. Hill.
And I'm Antoinette Antonio. In the next half hour, we're going to cover a variety of issues.
We will hear what our state is doing to try to be more environmentally friendly and why some say it may not be the best way to spend your tax dollars.
And with a big election just weeks away, we'll also hear from state political leaders on where they stand on climate issues.
But first, a debate that's still brewing among scientists. What's been causing temperatures to rise? Now, most scientists agree the Earth has been getting hotter, but there's disagreement.
Times how to land a job and keep it. Bulletproofing your job. It's on Inside Edition right after CBS Evening News. I'm Deborah Norville. Tonight at 7 during tough economic times, how to land a job and keep it, bulletproofing your job. Watch Inside Edition right before Chronicle HD. I'm Deborah Norville. Coming up after the news, during tough economic times, how to land a job and keep it, bulletproofing your job. It's on Inside Edition at 7:30 on KGW's News Channel 8. I'm Deborah Norville. Coming up during tough economic times, how to land a job and keep it, bulletproofing your job. It's on Inside Edition right here tonight at 7:30. I'm Deborah Norville. Coming up on Inside Edition exclusive, Robert Redford and his son's brush. I'm Deborah Norville. Coming up on Inside Edition exclusive, Robert Redford and his son's brush with death, the health crisis that changed their lives, and what they're doing in Atlanta to help save the lives of others. It's on Inside Edition tonight at 7:30, right here on CBS 46.